The Rothschilds have used their globalist media mouthpiece to declare that Donald Trump is threatening to destroy the New World Order, for good. Globalism propaganda tool and Rothschild family-owned publication, The Economist has branded the US president a present danger to the New World Order, and stated that the internationalists that formed it are spinning in their graves. The Economist names Trump as the biggest threat to the liberal New World Order above other legitimate threats such as jihadism and terrorism, communist Chinese expansion, and North Korean hostility. Perhaps the greatest danger at present is the incumbency of an American president who despises international norms, who disparages free trade and who continually flirts with abandoning America's essential role in maintaining the global legal order, writes The Economist. InfoWars reports, the globalist outlet refers to a book titled The Internationalists, to explain the origins of the liberal international order as a move to make the waging of aggressive war illegal, which is why it must be defended like never before. The rules-based international order that emerged from the wreckage of the Second World War was a huge improvement on any preceding era, states the article. Yet liberal internationalism is now under attack from many sides. Donald Trump's America First doctrine explicitly repudiates it. The Economist describes how the Trump administration views the world stage, citing a piece written by two of Trump's advisors in a Wall Street Journal op-ed. The world is not a global community but an arena where nations, non-governmental actors, and businesses engage and compete for advantage. H.R. McMaster and Gary Cohn wrote, "We bring to this forum unmatched military, political, economic, cultural and moral strength. Rather than deny this elemental nature of international affairs, we embrace it." The Economist then makes the strange assertion that, despite being directly responsible for numerous wars and destabilizing coup attempts around the world, the New World Order is better than any of the alternatives. Of course, there are still plenty of wars, it states. In some ways, the New World Order, which has helped make international wars so much less imaginable, has inadvertently made possible more intranational wars. Fragile and fractious countries that would previously have feared being conquered by more powerful neighbors can now fall prey to civil wars or brutal insurgencies without bad actors fearing loss of the national territory they seek to control. Non-state groups, such as Islamic State, a misnomer, can take and hold, at least for a while, territory from dysfunctional governments. Well-meaning but ill-conceived wars to change odious regimes have sometimes gone badly wrong. The magazine concludes by saying that the NWO architects of the past must be spinning in their graves considering how far Trump has already come and that he must be removed from office to preserve the New World Order.
It's so great to see you all again tonight. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you enjoyed that opening video. At last, we come through our 6 sessions on giants, Genesis and genetics, and after so many weeks, we finally touch on the all too relevant topic of the New World Order, which some people also call the International Order. That was how Obama used to address it in his speeches to the Bilderbergers, for instance. Now, while the New World Order involves globalization of laws, finance, education and culture, we will speak of nearly none of these. Our interest in this set of studies will be directed at a religious level, and with the occult aspirations and satanic cult that is the New World Order, the novus ordo seclorum of the Illuminati pyramid. There will be some overlap as we move from the original New World Order under ancient Nimrod to the modern New World Order under a new Nimrod, a ruling elite and their chosen representative, the biblical man of sin and son of perdition, also called the Antichrist. We will also bring in the legend of Osiris, which is very prominent in the philosophy of the Freemasons and Illuminati. Osiris, who seems to be the Egyptian equivalent to Asur, which is another name for Nimrod, the founder of Assyria, was a giant like Gilgamesh and was worshipped in the mysteries of in the mysteries as God of the underworld and Lord of the resurrection. But in the story of Osiris, he is murdered and cut into 13 pieces. His faithful wife, Isis, finds all his pieces and attempts to reassemble his body, but she cannot find his private parts. But by an occult ritual and a bit of occult magic, she is able to make his seed materialize, and from this she is able to inseminate herself and beget his son to continue his dynasty. The story is more symbolic than actual, as records do speak actually of the actual death and mummification of Osiris. His mummification is groundbreaking in one way, though. Not only does he have his organs placed in canopic jars around his sarcophagus, but he has also requested the preservation of his bodily fluids and blood hermetically sealed jars, also placed around his sarcophagus. Osiris thus demonstrates a real hope that a future generation might find a way to re-energize and revitalize his dried body from his bodily fluids. Probably didn't realize the fluids are going to dry up as well. Now, the symbolic meaning of Nimrod being cut into pieces and scattered around is that his body represents his kingdom at Babel. The pieces of his body are the people groups, still only families at this time, who are scattered in all directions after the Tower of Babel incident. The extracted seed is the doctrine, the political vision of Nimrod, which was almost lost but was finally recovered and secreted in the teachings of the subsequent mystery schools in the scattered nations. The mystery schools are symbolically Nimrod's miracle son, Horus, and patiently carry forward his great aspiration to the future until Nimrod can be re-enthroned. The eye of Horus, therefore, represents the age-old vision of the Illuminati, who now carry the torch for the mystery schools, that is, for Horus, in the world today. This is the great mystery in plain sight. It is the Illuminati who have spawned the modern vision for the New World Order under the mandate of their great American leader, Albert Pike. This same vision of a New World Order was also ruling Roosevelt and Churchill in the Second World War, and has continued both before and after that time as a guiding principle for all US presidents and most European rulers. George Bush Sr. was famous for expressing his enthusiasm for a New World Order, and under President Obama, Kissinger also repeated the same hope. There will be no relenting of this occultist vision until Jesus returns, when he sets up the true New World Order, the Kingdom of God, forged in heaven. This study of the New World Order will span 3 sessions. Today's presentation will include 6 video clips ranging between short and medium in length. So let's begin. So session 34, the New World Order. So we're going to start off with 2 videos. Secret of Knights Templar, make astounding bid to save the world. And I'm not sure what the first part of that is, but the Knight Templars are reportedly now activated to aid Trump.
In what is surely one of the most amazing reports we have ever read, Russia's Foreign Military Intelligence Directorate is reporting to President Putin today that they have confirmed that the most secretive organization in the world has contacted Lord James of Blackheath of the United Kingdom and made an astounding offer to save the global economy with their vast gold reserves said to be more than has been mined in all of the world's history. According to this report, representatives of the secretive Poor Fellow Soldiers of Christ and of the Temple of Solomon, otherwise known as the Knights Templar, contacted Lord James this past April in what is believed to be their first overt contact with the world since they were ordered disbanded by Pope Clement V in 1312. After their disbandment, and the Vatican's execution of most of its leaders, the Knights Templar, their secrets and enormous wealth, have been lost in the mists of history with too many legends about them to be recounted in any one writing, with the exception of the evidence showing their having escaped to the New World and establishing the United States of America so they could protect themselves from organized religion, especially the Catholic Church. In one such legend about the Knights Templar we can further read. Though this medieval, monastic order gave the appearance of being part of the Church and devout Christians, in actual fact, they were anything but that. Yes, they were a monastic order, they'd been approved by the Pope, and they were virtually independent of all civil and other church authorities, being responsible through their Grand Master to the Pope and the Pope alone. But in actual fact, they'd been founded by a group of families who had a very different and a very heretical view about Christ and his teaching. They had kept that teaching alive in secret for nearly 1,100 years and conspired to set up a counterbalance to church power. Further evidence of the Knights Templar having escaped to America include the ancient Kensington runestone found in Minnesota in 1898, which is linked to the mysterious Newport Tower in Rhode Island that remains the oldest stone structure in the United States and is said to be one of the oldest Templar temples outside of Scotland and gives the claim to the greater portion of North America. The Knights Templars' ascendancy to power in America was accelerated in 1693 with the founding of the College of William and Mary in Virginia under a charter issued by King William III and Queen Mary II, and which taught the ancient secrets of this order to the vast majority of what are now called the Founding Fathers of the United States, including Thomas Jefferson and 16 of the signers of the Declaration of Independence. Queen Mary II, 1662–1694, was long believed to an ardent supporter of the Knights Templar, if not an outright member, and ruled as a Protestant after the overthrowing of her Roman Catholic father James II and 7, 1633–1701, in the Glorious Revolution of 1688 that granted to all British subjects for the first time in history their revered Bill of Rights, and which barely a century later was, also, given to the American people. From this new beginning for the Knights Templar in the United States, until this present day, this report continues, 14 U.S. presidents have been directly associated with them as being members of the name their organization goes by in America called the Masons, and includes their first president George Washington. Content to operate behind the scenes of power in the United States these past nearly 2.5 centuries, the Knights Templars have, also, been greatly feared, and as evidenced by the 26th President of the United States, Theodore Roosevelt, stating about them, "Behind the ostensible government sits enthroned an invisible government owing no allegiance and acknowledging no responsibility to the people," and the 28th President of the United States, Woodrow Wilson, further stating, "Since I entered politics, I have chiefly had men's views confided to me privately. Some of the biggest men in the U.S., in the field of commerce and manufacturing, are afraid of somebody, are afraid of something. They know that there is a power somewhere so organized, so subtle, so watchful, so interlocked, so complete, so pervasive, that they had better not speak above their breath when they speak in condemnation of it." This past April, however, the Knights Templars' centuries-long silence came to an abrupt end when one of their spokesmen, Jonathan Stewart Leibowitz, held an extraordinary and secret meeting with U.S. Treasury Secretary Timothy Geithner, stating that his order was about to unleash their estimated wealth of over $980 trillion to save the world from itself. Important to note about Jonathan Leibowitz, besides his being educated in the Knights Templar College of William and Mary in Virginia, and his brother, Larry Leibowitz, being one of the most important men in America as the chief operating officer of the New York Stock Exchange, is that he was recently named as being the most influential man in the United States under his stage name of Jon Stewart, and who hosts a phone news program called The Daily Show. To what Leibowitz, Stewart, had told the power elite in America during his meeting with U.S. Treasury Secretary Geithner, this report continues, can be glimpsed in the unprecedented speech given on November 1 to the British House of Lords by Lord James of Blackheath, wherein he stated that he had been approached by a secret organisation he calls Foundation X, who offered to eliminate the United Kingdom's entire national debt in a move they said was designed to protect their vast wealth by protecting the entire global economy. Lord Blackheath further stated that this mysterious Foundation X was prepared to use its vast cash reserves to accomplish this astounding feat they said has since the 1920s been backed by their own gold reserves worth more than all that has been mined on Earth in all of history. In an interview with Sky News this past week, Lord Blackheath also stated that his investigation into the mysterious Foundation X found all of their claims to be true. In a surprise move, however, the British government turned down this unprecedented offer to eliminate their national debt with no further comment given. To the next moves Foundation X will take, who this GRU report states emphatically are the Knights Templar who control America, after being snubbed by a British government growing ever closer to the Roman Catholic Church, it is not said. What can be said though is that the power of the Knights Templar as it re-emerges into our world today cannot in any way be underestimated, as its long history has shown, most especially its ability to overturn everything it needs to in order to protect itself and a human race it has sworn to protect at all costs.
February 6, 2017. Feared Knights Templar assassins reported now activated to aid Trump. An extraordinary news Security Council (SC) report circulating in the Kremlin today about the escalating war being waged by the Pope Francis Vatican-led shadow government, known as the Resistance, against Freemason leader President Donald Trump states that British Freemason forces have now activated the most feared assassins in all of known history to come to the aid of their American brother currently under siege from these dark and satanic forces. According to this astonishing paralogized report, Federal Security Service (FSB) religious occult experts have compiled a dossier showing that nearly simultaneously with Pope Francis destroying the Order of Malta, Knights of Malta, for their supporting of Freemason leader President Trump, then installing as its new leader a known Nazi operative, who, in turn, is now pledging this ancient order's allegiance to the globalist elites by stating, "We are alarmed and concerned by the proliferation of discriminatory positions towards immigrants, not least, based on their national origin." British Freemason forces quickly, and ruthlessly, responded. To most fully understand this FSB dossier, Security Council intelligence analysts in this report say, one must first know that the Knights Templar have long laid claim to the United States, but whose actual founding was done so by both American and British Freemason forces during the Revolutionary War, but whose truest history first began in 562 AD when a massive comet hit Britain, nearly destroying the entire world, thus causing the legendary King Arthur to evacuate an estimated 70,000 of his Welsh subjects to the New World in order to save humanity's most ancient knowledge. A critical distinction to be made between these two ancient, secret, and powerful forces, this report explains, are that while the Freemasons trace their lineage back to the designing the Egyptian pyramids, and who plotted both the American and French revolutions, they are separate by age, ritual and time from the Knights Templar, but who keep their flame alive through highly secretive organizations such as the Provincial Priory of Staffordshire and Shropshire of Knight Templar Masonry, established in 1849, in England, that currently boasts 17 preceptories. Over the centuries, this report continues, the Freemasons and Knights Templar have established an extraordinary, amazing public messaging system between each other comprised of ancient signs and symbols not readily able to be deciphered, but that are actually encoded into the very city hearts of both London and Washington, D.C. In their having over the past 72 years since the fall of Nazi Germany, in 1945 during World War II, deciphered many of that fascist nation's occult secrets and practices, this report notes, FSB, formerly KGB, religious occult experts in knowing how the Freemasons and Knights Templar communicate with each other became alarmed, agitated this past week when after Pope Francis began his destruction of the Knights of Malta for their supporting of Freemason leader President Trump, two seeming nondescript articles appeared in the British press. The first one being that the No Sol St. Lawrence Freemasons Lodge had flocked to the aid of their feathered friends at an owl sanctuary in Staffordshire, and the second being 3 Freemason lodges in Cumbria donating £1,300 to an air ambulance organization. FSB religious occult experts in their dossier, this report notes, states that the owl symbol message that was publicly displayed by these British Freemasons in retaliation to Pope Francis is one of most feared in all of the world, So much so, in fact, that their Freemason brothers in the United States secretly encoded it as a warning into the United States $1 bill that depicts Master Freemason George Washington, father of the country, and that even to today, America's most powerful banking, corporate and political leaders bow down and worship before in terror should the full power of this owl message ever be unleashed upon them. And as to who is to be feared by this Freemason owl symbol, this report continues, are the Knights Templar Nizari-Shashin, that is an Islamic religious sect order of assassins who remain today as one of the most feared groups in all the world, and how the very name of this ancient order became the word used for political killings. Having formed an alliance with Knights Templar co-founder Hugh de Payens of Burgundy, this report continues, the ancient killing knowledge of the Nizari-Shashin was taught to both Knights Templar and Freemason mercenary soldiers alike, most particularly in the English areas of Staffordshire, where rumors still say the Knights Templar Holy Grail is located, and Cumbria, particularly in Temple Sowerby, where this village has association with the Knights Templar gave it the name Temple, with Sowerby being a Viking word for a homestead with poor soil. In fully understanding this FSB dossier complied by their religious occult experts, this report explains, the Freemason Knights Templar message displayed by these British Freemasons in retaliation against Pope Francis can be read as, the Knights Templar Nizari-Shashin have been activated and are even now being flown to the United States to protect Freemason leader President Trump. With Ordo Templi Orientis, Gnostic Catholic Church, leader James Wasserman being one of the world's acknowledged experts on the Knights Templar Nizari-Shashin, this report concludes, his past warnings that should these feared killers ever be unleashed in modern times to protect a Freemason leader it could lead to global war must be seriously heeded, as the body count of Freemason leader President Trump's enemies is now surely about to explode.
It was the historical account given to the Greek king Antiochus I by 3rd century BC Chaldean priest Berosus that spoke of Nimrod's original kingdom after the flood as being an attempt to establish a new world order. So this phrase is a very ancient one. Berosus is quoted in Josephus and other ancient historians as a reliable source, and is notable for the way he refers to the flood and to the 10 kings who were before it. The 10 kings that were before the flood are the genealogy of Noah from Adam through to Noah, Noah being the 10th from Adam. So that was accurate to the Bible. Now, he describes the new world after the flood as receiving its concept of civilization from a half-man, half-fish character called Oannes, who emerged from the sea with 7 brethren. Now, I think it's pretty clear that Oannes was Noah, or Noas in Greek. And the idea of emerging from the sea is probably his emergence from the ark. The 7 brethren are his wife, his 3 sons, and their wives. Berosus just has it a little confused, because Noah's family founded Babylonia and Berosus was a Babylonian, and also a priest of Bel. I think Berosus felt it necessary to make a deity out of Noah. Now it was Nimrod and his kingdom at Erech, however, that became the beginning of all kingdoms after the flood. And it was also Nimrod, according to the Encyclopedia Judaica, who developed the vision for establishing the new world as a single, centrally controlled political entity after the flood. There was to be both a religious and political empire, and we're all familiar with such empires in our own day, most notably the Vatican and Islam. Israel too was both a religious and political empire, and in the ancient world the separation of state and religion was never very strong. The modern American phenomenon of separating church from state, which is a mark of most modern Western nations, is actually a very new phenomenon in history. Secular archaeology is loath to accept that the Bible's Nimrod could be the source of all these kingdoms, as it disbelieves in the universal flood which caused a great reset of human history. It still believes that the histories of Babylon, Egypt, Assyria, China, the Americas are all completely independent of each other and in their timescales, and that they have independent religious backgrounds and independent origins. whereas the Bible, of course, teaches that they have a lot of things in common in their timescales and religious backgrounds and the point of their origins. However, it would not take a great deal of time, I think, to find the linguistic links that tie the founders of the first great Middle Eastern kingdoms of Egypt, Babylon, and Assyria together and trace them to a common ancestral line, because the languages are not too dissimilar. Egypt's first great founder, who brought together Upper and Lower Egypt as one great kingdom, was called Narma. Egyptologists don't want to accept it, but Narma is just a reworking of the name Nimrod. If we take out the vowels and look at the other letters, we can see that. Now, the founder of Assyria was called Ur-Nammu, not too different from Narma and not too different from Nimrod. Assyriologists don't want to admit it, but it's a reworking of the name Nimrod. Of course, Nimrod is an English version of the Hebrew word, Nimrod, or something similar to that. So you can see there's definitely a link between all of these names. Now, the founder of Babylon was Oannes, and that doesn't really link very well to Nimrod, but Oannes, as we've already pointed out, is very probably Noah. So the scholars of Babylonian history don't want to admit it, but as we've said before, it's just a reworking of Noas or Noah. And we can look at the letters in Oannes, and we could just about rearrange them to give us Noas. Now, according to the Encyclopedia Judaica, Nimrod was the one who decided the empire needed a world tower, which was the Tower of Babel. It was actually a ziggurat tower. It wasn't round, I don't think, like the one in the background. Probably had square sections. But in any case, this Tower of Babel would bring the voice of mankind to heaven. And he himself was the self-appointed high priest of God. But unfortunately, he came from the cursed line of Ham. He wanted to build it so high that the temple at its peak would be in the clouds, right at the very entrance to heaven, so to speak. It was to be the gateway to God, or Bab-El. Perhaps because of the forced labor involved in its building, or perhaps because of the curse on Ham, or perhaps because of the pride of its leader for thinking he could ascend above the clouds and into heaven itself, God rejects the tower. It causes a huge earthquake to ruin the huge edifice, also ruining the cities of Nimrod and causing the people to scatter abroad. The story says that God also introduced new languages on this day, as he scattered the people abroad, as if to undo all the work that Nimrod had done in trying to keep the language and culture singular in one place. God had, after all, reiterated his commandment to Noah's children to spread across the earth. The biblical telling of the story says God confused their languages there, or perhaps within a few generations at least, to fulfill the prophecy built into the name of the place, reading Bab-El for gateway to God as Babel, meaning by interpretation, that is, of languages, making a mockery of Nimrod's own god Bel, whose name meant interpreter, and Nimrod's desire for a single language. These black Cushite priests of Nimrod claimed the ability to interpret dreams and oracles for the people, divining the will of the gods, and they are the origin of African shamans and religious oracles. Today's occultists are still placing themselves in the position of these priests of Bel. The papacy today sits on a hill called Vaticanus, being Old Latin for place of divination. Religions that later worshipped Baal were reminiscent of those that originally worshipped Bel, and it is even possible that the Canaanite title Baal, meaning Lord, is simply a corruption of the Chaldean word Bel, originating over 1,000 years earlier. The great occult pursuit has always been, and continues to be, a resurrection of this New World Order. The leader of the New World Order will always be characterized as a new Nimrod or a similar name, allowing for language differences. For instance, the Greeks called Nimrod Nebrod, and this is exactly how Nimrod is rendered in the New English translation of the Septuagint, which is also called the Delphi Septuagint. So it's not hard to imagine that Neberod became Neberud, and then Neberu, which could also be written as Nibiru. That just so happens to be the modern name given, ostensibly on the basis of Sumerian texts translated by Zechariah Sitchin and others, for a planet that supposedly belongs to our solar system, which orbits in a huge ellipse with a period of 3,600 years, and on which a race of people called the Anunnaki may dwell. Others think they can detect a shorter 360-year cycle, but all seem to believe that a new passage of Nibiru through the solar system is due in this century. Well, given that astronomers, for their own reasons, were positing a mysterious planet X, a natural identification of Nibiru with planet X has recently taken place. And this planet is believed by many to be out there beyond Pluto and already affecting the solar system as it makes its inbound approach towards the Sun. Well, I'm not sure about planet Nibiru nor its inhabitants, or whether it is the same as planet X, but I think certain occultists, when they speak of the reappearance of the great heavenly power Nibiru, are instead speaking symbolically about the reappearance of Nimrod's kingdom on Earth and are referring to the New World Order. Right at the end of this talk, I'll devote a few minutes to expound what I think is probably the truth about this planet, for those who are interested. But for now, I'm going to say this, that Nibiru and the appearance of Nibiru and the effects of Nibiru on the Earth are code for the uprising, the political upheaval that's going to take place as the New World Order is set into place by the occultists. Now, Bab-el was the site of the first New World Order. The modern New World Order will be a new Babel, spiritually. Its ruler will spiritually be a new Nimrod. And one of the symbolic names for him is the planet Nibiru. But what do we know about Nimrod? What does the Bible really tell us? Well, for a start, his genealogy is very interesting. The numbers in it speak to us strongly in the symbolic meaning of them. Nimrod was, after all, the 13th from Adam. That number is clearly symbolic. He is the 6th son of Cush, again symbolic. And he is the 13th listed in the family list for Ham, which is again symbolic. The 13s and 6s, of course, speak of humanism and the devil, and of rebellion, and of the flesh, and of seeking religions that are offensive to God. The name Nimrod, which is really Nimrud, incorporates the letters of Marad, to rebel in Hebrew, and some modern linguists want to argue that the etymology is actually different than that, perhaps borrowed from Akkadian, the title, say, Mars Nergal, but the Hebrews took the name as a characterization and immediately detected the verb root rebel in his name. We have to recall, for instance, that Sumeria's first ruler was Ur-Nammu, and pre-dynastic Egypt's founder was Narmer, both of which are actually Nimrod. So I don't think that the Akkadian title Mars Nergal is the root of the name Nimrod. I think the other identifications are better. The Encyclopedia Judaica also claims that the ancient Babylonian hero Gilgamesh, who we've been talking about and the finding of his body in 2003, but they believe that it was none other than the ruler Nimrod himself. In Babylonian mythology, Gilgamesh is also lord of the underworld after his death and becomes a kind of Babylonian Osiris. It is in the epic of Gilgamesh that history has its second great record of Noah's flood, albeit a little different by then to the biblical account in its recollection of what exactly happened in Eden. Because, of course, cultures telling their creation stories want to also find their religious roots there. So if you have a different religion in Babylon when the history is being told, the story of the Genesis story will be told a little bit differently to draw out different significances. But apart from that, the basic notions of a race created in a place in the Middle East by the gods or by God, a flood, and then that destroys the world, and then a nation coming out after the flood. These things are all the same in both cultures. But there are other oddities about Nimrod that make us wonder about who exactly and what exactly he was. For beginners, he was one of those giants who appeared also after the flood, in the words of Moses. And he either used some special kind of technology to turn him into a giant, or his genetics carried some of the errors that had been introduced into the human genome by the actions of the angels and the giants before the flood. According to his own testimony, he was 2/3 God and 1/3 human. He was a Nephilim-like person who may have introduced something into his body to make it even more superhuman. Steve Quayle is a modern Christian researcher who believes the age of Gilgamesh knew about genetic manipulation, and that Gilgamesh was himself a product of such manipulation. Is it possible that Gilgamesh made himself into more of a giant than nature would normally have allowed? Did he know how to do this? The English translation of Genesis 10:9 says that Nimrod, who we take here to be identical then with Gilgamesh, was a mighty hunter before the Lord. Yet most ancient translators render this passage a little differently, reading giant for great. So where modern English versions have he was a great hunter, the Septuagint, the translation done in Greek for the Jews that were living in Alexandria and places like that, Septuagint says he was a giant hunter. The Syriac version says he was a great warrior. But the Arabic, which in some ways is closer to the Hebrew, opts for he was a terrible giant. Well, what could help us make a determination about the best rendering here? Perhaps a picture of Gilgamesh, a secondary historical reference about him, perhaps, or better still, discovery of his bodily remains. Well, our wishes were granted in 2003 when an excavation at Uruk uncovered the tomb of Gilgamesh. So the tomb of Gilgamesh was found in 2003. A German expedition found it while unearthing the ancient city of Uruk, or modern Iraq. Well, that's where modern Iraq derives its name from. And Gilgamesh was indeed a giant. He may have been as much as 16 feet tall, I believe, from the remains. The US military sealed off the excavation site during the Iraq War. YouTube images of a quite well-preserved body of a man within the tomb were released, but almost as quickly removed. And I should point out that the image that was on YouTube was of a body, not of bones, which makes it even more interesting, but subsequent reports were about bones. And so other reports later on will claim that it was a large skeleton that was recovered. Now let's take a look at a 13-minute video about stasis giants in general. These have been mostly found in Iran, not Iraq. And I can comment on an image there, I think, that was originally used when the story of Gilgamesh came up. So one of these images may well be what I thought at first was the Gilgamesh image, and I can perhaps point to it as we go. So here we have that video.
Awakened stasis giants secretly located and imprisoned by the global elite on Earth. Giants that have been in hibernation in stasis chambers for thousands of years are awakening and are being sought out by elite military forces, according to several independent sources. After being located, awakened giants are allegedly being captured and held hostage by powerful global elite groups that do not want the rest of humanity to learn the truth. Secret space program whistleblower known as Corey Good was among the first to publicly disclose the existence of stasis chambers that were holding perfectly preserved giants for thousands of years. Now, in an August 4, 2015 interview on the popular show known as Cosmic Disclosure, Good discussed how he had accessed information on smart glass pads during his covert service about these sleeping giants and the technology of the stasis chambers that were preserving them. So during this interview, Good said this: "When I was in the program, the secret space program, when I would have time to sit and look at the smart glass pad, there was lots of information that I looked at. And one of them was that there were beings that they found underneath the surface of the Earth. Now, this is usually underneath mountains, burial mountains, Indian burial mounds that were not dead, but weren't quite alive. They called them stasis beings, and it turned out that had used a technology that had been there long prior. Now from this group they call the ancient builder race. Now their form of stasis just changed the way they experience time. For example, they could sleep for 20 minutes and then 30,000 years would have passed by. Good described the size of the beings found in the stasis chambers when they were first discovered in the 19th century all over the planet. And to look down in, they saw these very tall beings, or very large giant humans with reddish beards. These tall, red-headed, red-beard groups were in Europe and South and North America, and apparently at one time, before the last ice age, apparently they had a very large area that they ruled. Good gave examples of stasis chambers that had been found around the world. Some were still operating with different modern human groups that had learned to use the technology, while others had been damaged and the beings in stasis had died as a result. According to Good, once located, the stasis giants were kept hidden, and any that awakened would join others and not be allowed to interact with the general public. According to Stephen Quayle, who has written several books about giants, elite U.S. military forces have been stationed around the world, including trouble spots such as Afghanistan, to locate the giants. Quayle cites elite military personnel who have spoken about battles with the giants. During one of Quayle's radio interviews on Coast to Coast AM, one of the military informants called in and told the audience about an incident in Afghanistan involving a deadly encounter between a 12-foot giant and U.S. Special Forces. The informant claimed that the giant had killed 9 members of an elite team sent to capture it, and it took a second team to arrive and finally kill the giant. Quayle uses biblical sources to support his analysis of giants and what they mean for humanity in the current era. Basically, he views them as the biblical Nephilim, who are the offspring of demonic entities that are hostile to humanity. The Nephilim, or giants, according to Quayle, were predicted to re-emerge during the end times and be restored to power by the corrupt global elite. In his book called Long Walkers: Return of the Nephilim, Quayle provides a fiction-based-on-fact version of what the elite have planned. Before history, giants and fallen angels ruled the earth as gods, until mankind revolted in a colossal battle, banishing the bloodthirsty creatures. But now, Joshua Kincaid has made an alarming discovery. Some of the giants are still alive and kept in secret underground caverns in suspended animation, waiting to be revived. Now what's worse is that a secret society, operating outside the law, is intent on bringing the monsters back to life and restoring the creatures as rulers of mankind. Now, Quayle's sources have been confirmed that giants have been preserved in stasis chambers for extended periods of time and are now awakening. Now, this is consistent with what Good discovered on the smart glass pads. However, Quayle's view that the giants are bloodthirsty Nephilim ready to work with the global elite to restore demonic control over the planet does not correspond with what Good read on the smart glass pads. According to Good, the motivations of the giants were far more complex than what Quayle was suggesting. Giants belonged to highly evolved civilizations in human history who had preserved themselves in stasis chambers to sleep through the dark ages of humanity. Their awakening was a sign that we are on the verge of a global shift, and many of the giants want to play a constructive role in this transition, rather than simply reassert control over surface humanity. Now, someone known as Cobra, which is a pseudonym, claims to be both an extraterrestrial contactee and an operative for a global resistance movement that dates back to 1975, when it was first established in the underground tunnels of New York City. While there is controversy over Cobra's identity and activities, he has released much information that is very accurate in terms of my own independent research into secret space programs and visitations by extraterrestrial life. His information, therefore, deserves careful consideration. I will consequently leave an examination of the controversy surrounding Cobra and what this means given the accuracy of his claims for a later article. On a March 21st interview, Cobra spoke about stasis giants and provides an additional source of information about their activities. In the interview, he responds to a series of questions concerning stasis giants. So the first question is, there are many reports of dormant giants being discovered and awakening in caverns around the world. Are these claims accurate? And Cobra responds with this: yes, some of those claims are accurate those giants are put into stasis in special chambers, which are triggered by a certain vibrational frequency. I would say certain intensity form a subatomic particles and energies from the galactic center, which is the Earth. Now those chambers get triggered, and those beings then are awakened from hibernation, and many such cases have been taking place lately around the world. Militaries of most countries, or shall we say of the major countries, have been suppressing that from the mass population, and whenever that happens, the military went there and just suppresses the whole thing. The next question is, are they a positive nature, these giants? And Cobra responds with, most of them yes, but some of them no. Now, Cobra's information about the motivation of the giants is very significant, since clearly such beings are physically very powerful and also hold much more information about past civilizations. Now, Cobra's information is consistent with what Good discovered on the smart glass pads, and also contrasts with Quayle's analysis. However, Quayle still raises important points, as the following portion of Cobra's interview suggests. Why are they waking up now? Because of the galactic central sun's activity, or what? And Cobra responds with, because they went into those chambers. They didn't want to wait for a change. They have put themselves into hibernation to spare. So not to wait too long on this planet, and now when the change is happening, they have interest to take part in this change. But they were not expecting that the surface population will take them hostage to such a great degree, and now they are taken hostage by the Chimera Group. The Chimera Group, according to Cobra, comprises global elites that are demonic in nature. This is consistent with much witness testimony that many groups of global elite practice various forms of demonic worship. It is therefore very plausible that some of the giants might have been co-opted by the global elite in a plan to exert greater global control. Now, in contrast, Quayle believes that the global elite see the giants as their demonic gods and are therefore helping restore their rule. Quayle's analysis is therefore only partially correct. Now, the giants are not per se associated with demonic forces, but are being sought by elite groups that are indeed associated with such forces, since the giants, at least those positively inclined, can play a constructive role with the global awakening of humanity. This is what Good has claimed he learned from smart glass pads, and also what Cobra was told by his sources in his recent interview. What is their actual function? And what is the function to wake up in this time period to do within this time of the planetary liberation process? And Cobra responds with this. They wanted to participate in the shift. They have various agendas. Now, some of them are quite positive and some are not positive, but they were not expecting that the amount of control and suppression on this planet would go that far. All of them were captured and are now actually hostages in various military bases around the world. If this is accurate, then Cobra's information helps corroborate the earlier claims of Good regarding the awakening of stasis giants and their potential impact on the rest of humanity in a positive manner during an evolutionary change. Now, in this regard, Good said this. This huge vibratory change in our solar system, this change supposedly we're changing from, graduating from one density to another, we're in transition. So if this is true and these beings are awakening and they set themselves to wake up during this time period, I could only speculate that they wanted to be part of that. Now, in contrast to this, Quayle's analysis overlooks the possibility that giants are being held in captivity by demonic groups, but are not themselves demonic, or at least not the majority of them. Now, according to Good and Cobra's information, for those giants that are inclined to work with a global elite, then Quayle's analysis raises a chicken and egg problem over demonic influences when it comes to the global elite and some of the awakened stasis giants. The problem with Quayle's analysis is that he makes the major assumption that all stasis giants are demonic in nature based solely on his interpretation of biblical texts. Consequently, he also appears to support the current secret policy of locating, imprisoning, and/or eliminating stasis giants wherever they are found around the world using elite military forces. Now, not only is Quayle's analysis deficient in this regard, but he may in fact be unwittingly helping the very demonic elite groups that want to hide the majority of these giants from the public view, while possibly using others in a covert plan for exerting great influence over global affairs. So in conclusion, there is a broad agreement between Good, Quail, and Cobra that awakened giants are being actively sought after by elite global groups and special military forces all over the world. Now when captured, they are taken to secret detention facilities. Clearly, the existence of giants who have hibernated for thousands of years in stasis chambers is a matter of public interest, as is their motivations for choosing to awaken from long periods of hibernation in the modern era. The information awakened stasis giants have about ancient human civilizations, advanced technologies, and extraterrestrial life deserves to be publicly released as soon as possible and not withheld to further the interests of global elites who may be seeking ways to manipulate these giant captives. So there's also an interesting interview with Steve Quayle in the link provided down below, so check it out. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you guys next time.
The discovery of the body of Gilgamesh, or Nimrod, has huge significance for occultists, actually. And the body, if well preserved, could possibly furnish its DNA to modern scientists. This has significance for the occultists because it represents some of the pure blood line of the serpent, being the 13th from Adam and being on that line of mankind that rebels against God and does so in a very overt manner. His blood is almost the best blood there is to be incorporated into the line of the Antichrist. There's another popular modern take on the Tower of Babel story. Some groups actually believe the Tower of Babel was designed to be a stargate, and that American interest in Iraq was less about political censure and more about stealing Iraq's ancient technologies. In the case of the Tower of Babel, this belief may trace back to the very name Bab-el, Gate of God. In other words, if the ancients believed that the gods, including the fallen angels, lived somewhere in space, Babel might have been built as a place not just to locate a temple, but also to place a stargate, a portal to another place in the galaxy or solar system, where men could communicate with the gods and angels could come and go. Now, while I'm very tempted to jump on this one and say hogwash, I am aware that there are several modern theories of parallel universes that have been produced by mathematical physicists which do allow within their solutions for step-across mechanisms that could allow human beings to move across time and space along paths that are not physical in the normal sense of the word. And indeed there are many urban accounts of apparent time slippage around the world, commonly on ley lines, which are lines of enhanced magnetic energy around the world, or places where the gravitational and magnetic fields resonate in some way. For example, in 1936, a ship investigating a huge crystal formation around the Bermuda Triangle suddenly jumped forward in time, and in 1938 many more of these crystal arrangements were found in other oceans. Project Southern Cross was then set up to investigate mechanisms for time travel. Stories of people suddenly finding themselves 30 or 40 years in the past are also common, and this even happened to my own uncle. Both full and partial dematerialization of UFOs also suggests that one can simultaneously span and slip between dimensions and make jumps across space and time. Magnetism seems to play a big part in the ability to manipulate time with space. In the Bible we have a precedent also. Philip's instant transportations across perhaps 50 kilometers or so to where the Ethiopian eunuch at Azotus was also requires this to be possible. Now, in the modern day, there are several accounts of this happening with Christians. You can find these on the YouTubes as well. For instance, a lady walking into a restroom at one airport stepped out and she was in another. We don't know how God does this, but we do know that it can be done. Theories that allow matter to be tuned in and out of phase with their surroundings allow craft to change phase in such a way that they can travel at speeds well above the speed of light. It seems, in other words, that each vibrational state has its own speed of light, and that's related to the frequency of the craft and the way it's able to interact with the space around it. We also don't know how the ancients managed to do genetic manipulation and produce giants with what we suppose was rudimentary technology, but it seems that they managed it nonetheless. The Jewish Encyclopedia confirms several historical records that Nimrod, whom they established was also identified by various ancient cultures as Osiris, Orion, Apollo, and Gilgamesh, built the Tower of Babel in an attempt to ascend into the presence of God. All histories seem to agree that Nimrod was more of a tyrant than a benevolent ruler. The image shown seems to show him with captive females, while the menfolk are his slaves, perhaps working to get their women back. I think the image must be on the next page. Now we can look at the men at the back left in the image and how they have their hands up in despair for the slave labor that they're under. Notice too the lion-like demeanor of Nimrod. Here he is, men in the back, the big whip that he's cracking, his great size, the women held in captivity in the back also looking upset, and of course he's at least twice as big, if not more, than most of those men there. So obviously he treated his workers as slaves. And this was not very long after the flood, so it's rather distressing to think that such a short time after the world has been destroyed because of its evil, that this man should be imposing himself in this way on other men. Now, to make life even more interesting as we come to the end of the age, the tomb of Osiris in Egypt was also recently discovered, in this case in 1999 in Cairo. Now, Osiris is quite possibly Nimrod himself. However, the mummy found in the tomb was believed to be a replacement for the real Osiris, who archaeologists think may have been taken by grave robbers sometime in the past. The tomb of Osiris was found, in fact, in the vicinity of the 3 Cairo pyramids. A body was found, but excavators, as I mentioned, do not think it's the original mummy of Osiris. The story of Osiris is quite interesting and lies at the center, actually, of the mystery religions. In the legend, Osiris is cut into pieces at his death. The goddess Isis, his wife, finds and restores all the lost pieces of her husband, except, it seems, for his private parts. Indeed, if the body of Osiris was indeed dismembered, as per the myth, we would not expect to find an intact mummy at all. While the dismemberment is probably symbolic, occult groups would certainly be interested to steal and keep the body of Osiris if they found it, and not just for religious sentiment or sentimentality, but also for the sheer usefulness of the DNA. And here's what I think we have to make of this story, though. Osiris, who is Nimrod, represents the early Sumerian kingdom, and the breaking apart of his body represents the breaking apart of his kingdom. The 13 pieces of his body are the 13 people groups, and of course 13 is the number that characterizes his name as well. Now these 13 people groups were still only, say, large families at this time, who were scattered in all directions after the Tower of Babel incident. It's not that they don't want to stay at Babel, but it's probably so ruined that they have to spread out just to find a new place to build their homes and make their living. The extracted seed is the doctrine, the political vision of Nimrod, which was almost lost but was finally recovered and secreted in the teachings of the subsequent mystery schools. The mystery schools are symbolically Nimrod's son, Horus, and patiently carry forward his great aspiration to the future, just as the son carries forward the aspirations and, in a way, name of his father. And they hope that in time Nimrod will be resurrected and re-enthroned. Again, this is symbolic of his vision for the world, a centralized world government, that it should reappear in the earth. In fact, through the various empires that followed and dynasties, it did in part do that. And as each empire fell, this vision had to be reinstituted and reinvigorated. And today, of course, with the large populations of the world and the many countries, we're now looking for a new world order, a global world order using corporate entities to unite the world, because they have their spread over the world and they are a good way to draw all things together. In fact, for those who haven't gone into it much, the United States itself is not a country so much, is actually officially a corporation, which is able to spread its tentacles around the world. Anyway, to repeat our introduction, the Eye of Horus is the vision of the Illuminati. It's not really the vision of the devil, but then again, in a way it is, because what they're doing is really the devil's work. And the Illuminati now carry the torch for the mystery schools, that is, for Horus, in the world today. The mystery schools are the guardians of the secret truths of this great vision of Nimrod. So this is the great mystery in plain sight. It is the Illuminati who have spawned the modern vision of the New World Order under the mandate of their great American leader, Albert Pike, who carried forward the vision of Adam Weishaupt before him. This same vision of a New World Order was also ruling Roosevelt and Churchill in the Second World War, and has continued both before and after that time as a guiding principle for all US presidents and most European rulers. And the Bilderberger groups and all those people that meet there all share this vision and are always meeting to discuss how they can push it forward. George Bush Sr. was famous for expressing his enthusiasm publicly for a New World Order, and under President Obama, Kissinger also repeated the same hope. There will be no relenting on this occult vision until Jesus returns and sets up the true New World Order, which is forged in heaven. Now, just in passing, does anyone see how this parable of the broken body feeds into the communion meal of the Christian? The Christian church too, and the followers of Christ too, are a kind of kingdom and nation scattered into the world through the cataclysm of the broken body of the Messiah. So the occultists have the broken body of Nimrod, but the Christians have the broken body of Christ. Each produces a kind of kingdom, which it is believed will finally, at the end of the world, possess the world and rule it. The only difference between, I guess, the church and Nimrod is that God, through prophecy, has announced the kingdom of God, and has at no stage announced the kingdom of Nimrod to be the world of the future. Now, the church too is more or less born at Pentecost, which involves a miracle of mixed languages. We remember that the tongues of fire came down on the people that prophesied in a range of languages, in fact 16 other languages plus Hebrew, making it 17. 17 becomes the number of the church's evangelical mission. Well, at Babel also, with the scattering and the breaking of the tower, which was an act of rejection by God, the people were scattered around speaking different languages. So there are definitely connections. Christians eat the communion bread to remember that they are part of a body that has its members spread across the nations, speaking all languages, but which remains one in its common vision. Again, rather like the Illuminist vision for the Satanic World Order. Now, Paul says that we should discern the body, that is, we should see the whole church in the world as we eat the bread. The church too, although somewhat more open than the Illuminati, is therefore a kind of secret society in the world. The return of Nimrod for the occult realm stands against the second coming of Jesus Christ for his church, just as darkness stands alongside light. But we know that every dark night is eventually broken by the arrival of the morning light, and we are coming into a dark light now. But the ministry of Donald Trump and the US government hopefully is going to uncover some of this darkness and fill a lot of secret things with light. And I don't know whether he's going to succeed entirely, but at least he sets forth the pattern of things to come in his presidency. And we live in very interesting times. So anyway, enough of my esoteric reflections, and let's get back to Nimrod. The pieces of Osiris, if we can equate Osiris with Nimrod, may be a symbolic way of describing the pieces of his kingdom, and thus the scattered races of Nimrod's kingdom, the center of which was at Babel. The mystery religion of Isis has as its goal the resurrection of Nimrod. It seeks for a merger of different races, religions, and cultures. It wants to bring them, whereas those things all broke out of Babel, it wants to bring them all back in. So to do that, it has to merge together the various races, religions, and cultures that have since developed, and has to, in a sense, teach them all about their common roots and reintegrate them. And so it seeks for a new world religion, and the Catholic Church is busy doing this for the New World Order. And this new world religion will re-establish its defiance against the God of heaven. It must therefore be a Luciferian religion. So the Catholic Church has a problem, because whereas it's doing the work of bringing all religions together under its own umbrella, the New World Order is going to insist that it causes this one world religion to turn its worship and adoration toward Lucifer and away from Christ. And this is going to cause a major point of tension somewhere down the track, and not too far down the track, I don't think. If humanism will have a deity at all, it will be Lucifer. Well, even though I don't think Lucifer, the fallen archangel, is actually a correct understanding of the Isaiah 14 text, the popular conception of Lucifer is so strongly entrenched that it may well be a figure used by occultists to mock Christians to their face. Lucifer is the one who casts off every restraint of heaven and pays the ultimate price. He's banned from heaven for good. He's destined for the fires of hell for what he has done standing up against God, because he's not happy with God being a slave master, so to speak. Well, that's the way he paints the picture. The people in the world feel the same, so they identify with Lucifer. The proud humanist identifies with the nature of Lucifer and will pay the same price, which is the price paid by all sinners. But he does so by choice. And for this reason, the devil that Jesus said was created for the devil and his angels is the same place that all sinners will also be dispatched. Humanism says that God is a human creation. The God of humanism is naturally Lucifer, but the humanist doesn't actually believe in any gods. Lucifer for him will be a symbolic entity. Lucifer was the one who cast off all allegiance to Jehovah and therefore to all deistic belief. Lucifer is, by his very name, a shining and beautiful entity. To the Satanist, he is a light of illumination, of true understanding, that sees in a way that there is no God, that man himself is the nearest thing to a God, that gods are just a projection of man's own being, sort of psychological projection, to account for the wonder that is in man himself. So the humanist understanding of the world is to them a bright revelation, and this is what they'll worship in the new religion. For them, this truth is just as liberating as the biblical truth is for the Christian. Of course, the Christian truth is to do with handling of sin, and the Satanist doesn't believe sin is anything more than a relative description of behavior, and something that can be handled by oneself and doesn't need to be dealt with from heaven. The modern champion of the Luciferian religion was born in the 1800s and was considered by some to be the world's best read man. He's believed to have read virtually every work of the occult that was in existence by the time he became the Grand Master in his Scottish Rite. His name was Albert Pike. Now, there are other rites within the Masonic orders, but he established this particular one, which is very popular, and most of the leaders of the world today advance through this rite. Many of our presidents and prime ministers have actually been 33rd degree Masons. Pike was, well, he wrote 64 books, and the most famous is perhaps Morals and Dogma of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry in 1871, and the whole book is actually available to be listened to as an audio tape on YouTube. Now, it is a long listen, I do warn you. I have had a listen to it. But it's quite interesting, but it is really pure humanism, really, using the guise of mystery religions and getting to the heart of their meanings, and then projecting forward in the modern world into how those truths are going to be revealed politically, and in other ways in the world. But of course, Pike also had the vision of the 3 world wars, how the world was going to be broken down into a state of such weakness that the Illuminists could then come into power and put in the worship of Lucifer as they repaired the world and started all over again. So Pike, it appears, is actually the mind behind all the troubles we have in the world today, although he's long dead. We have come through 2 world wars already and now stand at the precipice of the 3rd and final of his wars. In a letter to his friend Giuseppe Mazzini, he describes a dream which showed him how to set up a new world order after 3 cleverly crafted world wars. The First World War had to be brought about to permit the Illuminati to overthrow the power of the Tsars in Russia and to make that country into a fortress of atheistic communism. Now, you'll recall that before that, the Tsars were very strongly religious, linked to the Russian Orthodox Church, and the Russians, sort of a bit like, they worship their Tsar rather like the English hang on to the Queen, and she's the head of the church there, just as the Tsars were, in a sense, figureheads for the Orthodox Church in Russia. So, along with the overthrow of the Tsar came the destruction of the Orthodox Church at that time, and it was replaced by a godless, atheistic society, and with the political ideology of communism. The divergences caused by the Agentur, that is, the agents of the Illuminati between the British and Germanic empires, were going to be used to foment the war. At the end of the war, communism was then to be built and used to destroy the other governments and to weaken the influence of their religions. So it was going to feed back as much as anything else in terms of propaganda into the societies, the Christian societies, and try to weaken their belief systems. Now, the Second World War was going to be fomented by taking advantage of the differences between the fascists and the political Zionists. So the Germans and the Jews, if you like. That would be probably too simplistic. But this war must be brought about so that Nazism is destroyed, and so that political Zionism will be strong enough to institute a sovereign state of Israel and Palestine. Now, during the Second World War, international communism must become strong enough to balance Christendom, which would then be restrained and held in check until the time when the Illuminists would need it for the final social cataclysm. So, with the weakening of Christianity and the strengthening of Israel, there was a hope to make a Jewish state in Palestine. And so then you'd have a return to Judaism, you would have a strong communist presence in the world, and a weakening of Christendom. And that would poise the world, put it into a place of readiness for the Third World War. And it says the Third World War must be fomented by taking advantage of the differences caused by the Agentur, that is, the agents of the Illuminati, between the political Zionists, those who are in Israel or support Israel or are Jews in other countries working politically for Israel, and the leaders of the Islamic world. So now they were going to bring the Islamic world up, empowering them and filling them with zeal. So this war must be conducted in such a way that Islam and political Zionism, which we can probably identify as the states of Israel, Britain, and the US, should mutually destroy each other. So the idea was to get a war going so that in the end of it all, the Islamic countries would be ruined, and so would Israel, and so would Britain, and so would the US. So meanwhile, the other nations, once more divided on this issue, not really sure whose side to take, will be constrained to fight to the point of complete physical, moral, spiritual, and economic exhaustion. Pike said that we, the Illuminati, shall unleash the nihilists and the atheists, and we shall provoke a formidable social cataclysm, which in all its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism, namely the origin of savagery and of the most bloody turmoil. So even though the lawless will then take over and sort of make a terrible mess of society in the aftermath of this great destruction between the old forces, even it will be shown to be bankrupt morally. And so the Christian world will be shown to be bankrupt, and so will the atheist world. What follows then is that then everywhere the citizens, obliged to defend themselves against the world minority of revolutionaries, will exterminate those destroyers of civilization, and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, whose deistic spirits will from that moment be without compass or direction, anxious for an ideal, but without knowing where to render its adoration, will receive the true light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer, being brought finally out in public view. And that's the plan. Now, to this point, it's been going quite well. It's not to say that his plan is going to come to full fruition, but certainly it has come a long way down the path. And that's particularly so because it's all been done in secret. There's nothing been public about it at all. So anyone that sort of touched on this in the past was called a conspiracy theorist. But of course, as we've found out, that most of the conspiracies that have been talked about have actually turned out to be true. Manifestation will result from the general reactionary movement which will follow the destruction of both Christianity and nihilistic atheism, both conquered and exterminated at the same time. Now, some think that Pike's letter to Mazzini is a hoax. Well, hoax or not, we seem to be following this dream like a script, and many argue that we are already, in fact, in the first stages of World War III. The plan is to build the New World Order from the ashes of society after World War III. Now, I'm quite interested in this last point in Pike's discourse. Pike says that both Christianity and atheism at the final step will be destroyed at the same time. Now, in fact, his word is exterminated, which is pretty rough. This makes the religious people actually sound rather like vermin. It doesn't bode well. It seems that if they do get their chance to do this, they will do it without any compassion whatsoever. Doesn't talk about removal or disempowering, but extermination. But what does he hope to put in place if both the religion of Christ and the religion of no God are removed? Well, there is obviously some sort of a God still left over. All that can follow from this is the religion of a different kind of Messiah, if it's not a Christian or Jewish one. So this other Messiah must be either Lucifer or some alien god. Now, in the case of Hitler, the final solution was to exterminate Europe's degenerates, starting with Poles, homosexuals and Jews, and then to make the state the object of worship. I don't think Pike has the state in mind, but at one level the worship of Lucifer will be just another tool, allowing the state to keep its control over the people. And from the time that Nimrod built his own primeval empire, the strongest tool for controlling the people was, in fact, its religion. Probably the other thing that could have rallied them together would have been war, but it was still too early in the restoration of the human race for that to happen much. Now, Lucifer worship is interesting because if they don't believe there's a supernatural power, and in fact they may even not believe that Lucifer was a real entity, just a symbolic one, then the religion at this stage will become a symbolic expression and not a true practice of worship toward what is perceived to be a real deity. It will just be a kind of outward rite. It will have no real meaning for the heart. So I don't think it will be real Lucifer worship in that sense, but it will be a worship of Lucifer in the sense of saying to everybody that there is no going back to the old religions. Sort of in the name of Lucifer, that's all been destroyed. And the kind of freedom that's being offered in that new religion is not freedom from sin or from broken relationship with God, but it's freedom to do as one pleases, to be one's own self-regulating moral compass, to be a god in one's own right. And then in a way it's a fulfillment of that promise of eating the fruit of the tree of knowledge of good and evil, where, as the serpent said, if you eat the fruit you will actually become like the gods, knowing good and evil. So what's wrong with that? And God himself, in a sense, well, he hadn't said that. He said that they would know good and evil. It was the serpent who said you'll become like gods. And there is a supernatural element missing, I suppose, in the humanist intentions that are being established through Lucifer worship. It would be done without supernatural power, but they, of course, hope to replace all of that supernaturalism with the wonders of advancing technology. As people have said, to the primitive, advanced technology looks just like magic. like the power of the gods. So, Lucifer worship. The beast, we know, arises from the abyss. So he comes from the same place of wickedness and power as the original angelic rebellion. Worship of the image of the beast can be equated to, as we've said, in real terms, human self-worship, and symbolically to Lucifer worship. But even though the human being will be allowed to live as if they were a god in their own right, it will only be within the general superstructure of strict obedience to an all-controlling state entity. The spirit of the Antichrist embodies the spirit of Nimrod, the spirit of apostasy, the spirit of world empire, and of course, kind of at the heart of it all, the spirit of human pride. Man has made it without God, is the thought. And we're just going to play a video now which is going to show Albert Pike's letter to Mazzini and what it says about World War III, just for the record. Now, one central symbol of it is the image of Lucifer. Lucifer's religion is the vision of Albert Pike and the High Mason, and is intimately linked with the plans of the Illuminati and New World Order. In fact, if we get to the heart of it, all of these movements have humanism at their heart, a kind of a world socialist communism, a kind of human ideal where everybody has the same things. However, all of them are also in kind of a reactionary rejection of religion as it was in the world in the late Middle Ages. Even in the time of the 15 and 1600s under the Reformation, even this form of Christianity is rejected by them. And so we mustn't forget that Pike and the Masons and the Illuminati were all founded by people who had come out of the Catholic Church and were disillusioned with it. Nevertheless, they learnt many of their religious structures and their ways of doing things from that church. And so we see a kind of similarity in the satanic world, a kind of a dark parallel to the things that are done in the Christian world. So even though they say they're not religious, there are still religious things about them. But herein also lies the great error of the Luciferians. They have, in the first instance, made use of a faulty Christian doctrine about Lucifer, and it's built upon a shallow reading, actually, of Isaiah 14, as evidence for a spiritual person, who doesn't exist then, that they can commit themselves to, and for whose cause they can fight. Now, in reality, that person is not real. It can only be a symbolic entity that they fight for. But what they don't realize is that they've committed themselves actually to the worship of man and not some god. Because there's still worship involved and ritual, there is some sort of a deity involved as well. And if it's not the true God, then the only other replacement for it is actually man himself. Now, in the Isaiah 14 story, the true subject of the discourse is not Lucifer, but King Nebuchadnezzar. Now, as ruler of the world's most powerful empire, Nebuchadnezzar stood as the king of the world. Now, in that regard, he held the same position as Adam did in Eden. Whoever the leader of the world empire was, he was, in a sense, the Adam of the day. But Adam and Eve fell essentially because of their pride. They held dominion over all creation. They saw their own beauty as a sign of their divinity. They knew that they were almost, you could say, directly descended from God. They'd been made at his own hand. And they wanted to know the knowledge that would go with that beauty. Now, Nebuchadnezzar was every bit as proud and regarded the glory of Babylon as his own great achievement. He now held dominion over all creation. Nebuchadnezzar, like Adam, was, now in a figurative language, the anointed cherub that covers. Now, often this is related to Lucifer, and people claim that he was an archangel that covered the throne of God, but in fact, that's just a fanciful reading. The one that covers the creation and covers the world with authority is, in fact, mankind himself. Cherubs were angels that carried the throne of God around the world, and Adam's role was also to be the high priest of the human race, and in that sense to carry the throne of God into the world. He was an anointed cherub in a very true sense. Nebuchadnezzar's throne was God's own throne, and Nebuchadnezzar was the spiritual redemption, that is, the covering for mankind. Just as Adam was proxy for God, so Nebuchadnezzar was. Now, modern man lives in a modern Babylon and has similar pride. The Babylonian Empire in its spirit is no longer just in Iraq, but it's worldwide. The bright morning star, which has been translated in the Latin as Luciferus, is actually a very poor translation of the Hebrew there, The Hebrew is in fact Hallel, and the most literal meaning of Hallel is boaster or proud one. The whole objective of the Isaiah 14 discourse is to uncover the great and dangerous pride of Nebuchadnezzar and point from there to the pride of man himself. It is this proud king that the Illuminati really seek to make their king. Lucifer is no fallen archangel at all. That is just a myth of the Catholic Church and another piece of error that we can thank them for. But the Illuminati have bought into it entirely. Anyway, to finish up tonight, we will be playing 4 video clips that talk a bit about Albert Pike, the Illuminati control of Islam, David Icke's belief that Pike's nihilists have already been seen in the form of the Al-Qaedas and ISILs of the world, and the schism that is already brewing in at least one American state, threatening the social catastrophe that Pike is hoping to incite. These 4 videos, which are 8 minutes, 11 minutes, 15 minutes and 11 minutes in length, will take us about 50 minutes then in total to get through. And let's see how we go. And after the videos, I'll also keep my promise to talk a little bit about Nibiru. But first we have the videos.
He used to be a Catholic and then became a Protestant. This war would never have been possible without the sinister influence of the Jesuits. We owe it to Popery that we now see our land reddened with the blood of our noblest sons. Abraham Lincoln, 1865, 16th President of the United States. Lincoln's private letters that were burnt by his son Robert, restated by Charles Chinnicky, who was the personal confidant of the President. In a letter dated 22 January 1870, Mazzini wrote to Pike. Now, Albert Pike is this high Mason who wrote the manual, if you like, of Scottish Freemasonry. He said the following: "We must allow all of the federations to continue just as they are. It must appear as things are as they were in the beginning, with their systems, their central authorities, and diverse modes of correspondence between high grades of the same right, organized as they are at present, but we must create a super right, which will remain unknown, to which we will call those Masons of high degree, whom we shall select. With regard to our brothers in Masonry, these men must be pledged to the strictest secrecy. Through this supreme right, we will govern all Freemasonry, which will become the one international center, the more powerful because its direction will be unknown." Now, Albert Pike wrote a letter to Mazzini, and that was dated August 15, 1871, in which he propagated that there should be a world order, a one order where all nations are under the control of one central organization. And in order to achieve this, they planned the First World War, to overthrow the power of the Tsars in Russia, protector of orthodoxy, and bring about an atheistic communistic state. Did that happen? The Second World War, that's also written long before the event, to originate between Great Britain and Germany, to strengthen communism as antithesis to the Judeo-Christian culture, and bring about a Zionist state in Israel. Did it achieve this objective? Yes? In fact, after this war, Israel, in its present form, was reinstated under the protection of Britain. And then, interestingly enough, a Third World War, a Middle Eastern war involving Judaism and Islam, and spreading internationally. Well, here's another quote, just in case people don't like that quote. Mazzini with Pike developed a plan for 3 world wars so that eventually every nation would be willing to surrender its national sovereignty to a world government. The first war was to end the Tsarist regime in Russia, the second to allow the Soviet Union to control Europe, the Third World War was to be in the Middle East between Muslim and Jews and would result in Armageddon. Interesting. Now, how were they going to do it? Let's read what Albert Pike wrote about these wars and how they were going to be unleashed. He wrote, quote, "We shall unleash the nihilist and the atheist," so the destroyer and the atheist, "and we will provoke a formidable social cataclysm which in its horror will show clearly to the nations the effect of absolute atheism. Origin of savagery and the most bloody turmoil. Then everywhere the citizens obliged to defend themselves against the minority of revolutionaries will exterminate these destroyers of civilization, and the multitude, disillusioned with Christianity, will receive the pure light through the universal manifestation of the pure doctrine of Lucifer. The destruction of Christianity and atheism both conquered and exterminated at the same time. Wow, what a clever plan. So you rub the two systems which you create up against the other. You create atheism as an antithesis to the Judeo-Christian culture. You have these two clash until they rub each other up, and then out of that you will get a new world order where you have a new religion which is far more esoteric and actually honors Satan. Isn't that a rather clever plan? Well, it's very successful. That is why Ordo ab Cao is the verse, if you like, that Freemasonry uses. This is one of their documents, remember, that I photographed in a Masonic lodge. And Weishaupt is the father of Jacobinism. You will remember that we spoke about that in Revelation chapter 11. And Jacobinism was the power that propagated the French Revolution. And we did this in Revelation chapter 11, where the Bastille was stormed, liberty leading, the goddess of reason was enthroned instead of Christianity. So Christianity was removed and another reign began. The monarchy was deposed, and Louis and his wife lost their heads, the beheading of Marie Antoinette, and that put an end to that monarchy. Then Robespierre, he headed the Jacobin clubs, and a reign of terror commenced, which in its bloodshed and its violence rivals anything that we have seen to date. The great philosopher, if you like, of the French Revolution was Voltaire. Now you can look it up in any Encyclopedia Britannica. They will tell you who Voltaire was. He was a Jesuit. They will say, of course, he was a renegade Jesuit that left the Roman Catholic Church to write against it. No, no, no. He was just playing the role perfectly, because they were setting up an antithesis. Do you remember the promise that a Jesuit makes? That I will take either side and do it perfectly, as long as in the end the Mother Church wins. The social contract: man is born free and everywhere is in chains. One man thinks himself the master of others, but remains more of a slave than they are. That's true. But what if you created the slavery in order to create the misery, in order to create the revolution? Isn't that possible?
Albert Pike was one of the most colorful characters in American history. It is said that he was born on December 29, 1809 in Boston, was the eldest son of 6 children born to Benjamin and Sarah Andrew Pike. He studied at Harvard and later served as Brigadier General of the Confederate Army. After the Civil War, Pike was found guilty of treason and jailed, only to be pardoned by President Andrew Jackson on April 2, 1866, who met with him the next day at the White House. On June 20th, 1867, Scottish Rite officials conferred upon Johnson 32nd degree Freemasonry degrees. Pike was said to be a genius, able to read and write 16 languages. He was one of the founding fathers of the head of the ancient accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry, being the Grand Commander of North America Freemasonry from 1859, and retained that position until his death in 1891. In 1869, he was the top leader of the Knights of the Ku Klux Klan.
This video will cover Grand Wizard Albert Pike's 3 World War predictions, which are quite frankly stunning. But first, I want to give a background on the person who exposed the Illuminati's preparations for World War III and how they plan to use Islam to destroy the West. A secret diary was released by a man with information about elitist organizations and the New World Order. This diary documents that the Illuminati already knows what is going to happen for World War III. It's already mapped out. The agenda's already set. The diary that exposes this agenda belonged to a man named William Carr, who was born in 1895. Carr entered into Canada's Royal Navy at a very young age and ascended to the position of commander. He knew many at the top of their fields in politics and law and in academia. His side hobby was writing books, specifically books on the New World Order. His books documented the breadth in which the Illuminati had taken over all aspects of society, including churches and seminaries. In fact, Carr claimed to have received an SOS letter from a high-ranking official in the Roman Catholic Church in November 1958. The letter outlined a hostile takeover that was underway in the Vatican, the Illuminati having infiltrated the Vatican's quarters. Carr would die less than a year after receiving the SOS message. Carr also documented history behind the most elusive organization in world history, the Illuminati, and their religion, which is Luciferianism. He believed that modern organizations, including the Bilderberg Group and the Council on Foreign Relations, are Luciferian political organizations. He also believed that the chief governing body for Lucifer, for the ascension of the capstone, was the United Nations, and he documented this in his books. Carr wrote several books. His most controversial book was published after his death. It is called Satan, Prince of this World, and is really nothing more than Carr's personal diary and notes he saved for many years. In this book, Carr documents receiving the SOS letter from the high-ranking Vatican official, but he also documents other interesting things. For example, Carr believed that secret societies weren't working independently of one another, but that they were controlled by a top-level organization called the World Revolutionary Movement. And that's literally in his book, Satan, Prince of the World. This organization at the top tier is interested in inciting war, terrorism, and distress to serve its fundamental interests. And that is to establish the New World Order, a Luciferian system of governance and religion. Carr speaks at length about World War III in his book, Satan, Prince of the World. He documents that World War III was planned by a 33rd degree Grand Wizard named Albert Pike. Albert Pike was a notorious Luciferian who openly praised Lucifer in his book Moral and Dogma of the Ancient and Accepted Scottish Rite of Freemasonry. Pike was also a general for the Confederacy during the Civil War, and a wizard of occult magic, channeling and summoning of spirits. William Carr documented that Albert Pike wrote a letter to a friend in 1871 outlining the final and largest of the wars. According to Carr, what Albert Pike actually wrote was a lot more than a letter. It was a blueprint that spelled out exactly what would happen in the last war. Carr said, quote, "In the 1860s, Albert Pike is recorded as saying his military program might take 100 years or a little longer to reach the day when those who direct the conspiracy at the top will crown their leader king despot of the entire world and impose a Luciferian totalitarian dictatorship upon what is left of the human race." That's what they're saying. Pike seems to indicate a conspiracy to start a war so that the Antichrist can ascend to his position as world ruler. Pike's letter ironically also detailed the specifics of the first two wars with stunning accuracy, suggesting that he knew before time the details surrounding each of the wars. World War I, according to Pike, would be fought to overthrow the czars in Russia and change Russia into a communist state. The Second World War would be fought for two reasons: to establish the State of Israel and to expand communist control over Europe. The Third World War will be what allows the Novus Ordo Seclorum to rise out of the dust. According to Pike, Islam will be the central factor in the downfall of the West. Islam will be decimated in the process, allowing for the new religion of pure Luciferianism to spread on the earth. All Muslims will fall for this system. There isn't a single Muslim on earth who will not partake in the religion of the New World Order, according to Pike. Islam is merely a tool to destroy the Christian West. That's it. That's all it is. It's a tool. That's what they said hundreds of years ago. The master plan to use Islam was kicked off in 2001 when the fear of Americans was taken advantage of by an esoteric cabal lurking in the shadows.
Do you not think an angel rides in the whirlwind?
In his inaugural address, George W. Bush proclaimed that an angel would ride the whirlwind and direct the storm. The master plan was unveiled in 2001 for World War III. They started Albert Pike's blueprint when they flew two planes into the World Trade Centers and blamed it on Islam. The storm that would come and the angel that would bring it were long-awaited prophetic fulfillments. And as Albert Pike, Grand Wizard of the craft, had predicted, Islam would be the choice religion to use to foment a crisis between it and the West that would only get worse. What is the common factor every time we see a crisis? Who's behind it? Islam. And they want you to believe it's organically an issue of Islam. This was planned hundreds of years ago, and they have quite a plan for Islam. The esoteric cabal is using Islam to achieve the great work. It's all been mapped out. We've seen what they're doing with the migrant crisis. We've seen what they've done in England with the Sharia courts, and on and on and on. They're using Islam to stir the pot. The system has to come down. It has to topple. Islam will be used for the ultimate goal, and that is to fully usher in the Luciferian capstone. They're going to keep using it to destroy Western Christianity, Western culture. It's going to happen, and there's really nothing you can do about it except to pray. That's it. That's what we're called to do. It's been predicted. They've known about this since at least the late 1800s. And even earlier than that, I think. All world wars have been mapped out. The third and the last one was already written in the books. You have no control over this. This is a battle between principalities and powers and dominions. And that is why our brother Paul told us to pray and to go to war against those principalities and powers.
And from the ashes of their world, we'll build a better one.
Do you not think an angel rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm?
Out of these troubled times, our fifth objective, a new world order, can emerge, a new era, freer from the threat of terror.
This work continues. The story goes on. and an angel still rides in the whirlwind and directs this storm.
A world where the United Nations, freed from Cold War stalemate, is poised to fulfill the historic vision of its founders.
Prime at the moment is what's going on in the Middle East. And this is something that, I've been talking about, writing about for years and years and years. It's quite surreal, actually, watching it unfold on the television news now, because there has been an agenda for going way back. We're not even talking a few decades, to be honest. That's how far it's projected forward. To create a situation where what one major Freemason called Albert Pike in the 19th century called unleashing the nihilists. In other words, unleashing people with no morality, completely extreme psychopathic people upon the world to create enormous horrors that will demand a response from the world. And of course, the background to that is those unleashing the nihilists, now called ISIS or Islamic State, are the same people who are unleashing the response in terms of bombing in Iraq and in Syria. Very clearly, and the evidence is overwhelming, these countries in the Middle East have been on a wish list for a long time, and going back again decades and decades. But you can pick it up in around 2007 when Wesley Clark, the former head of the military end of NATO in Europe, said that he had been told a few days after 9/11 by a top man in the Pentagon that they were going to invade Iraq. I mean, let's just emphasize this. The invasion of Iraq was in 2003. He's saying that he was told this a few days after 9/11. He said then that he went back a few weeks later, met the same person and said, well, I thought you said we're invading Iraq. Why aren't we invading Iraq? And why would we invade Iraq? No one seemed to know at that time. And the guy, he said to him, pulling a piece of paper off his desk, it's worse than that, sir. We've just had this down from what was in effect Rumsfeld's office, the Secretary of Defense at the time of 9/11. And we're going to invade country after country after country over the next few years. And he named them. They were going to be Libya. They were going to be Syria. They were going to be Iran. And they were going to be Iraq. And what's happened is this wish list, this agenda of countries to take over, has been unfolding ever since. But of course, they have to hide the fact that it is a coordinated picking off of countries by using different excuses for invading or bombing the different countries. So in Afghanistan, it was bin Laden's there, even though bin Laden and the Taliban came out of the creation by the United States, the CIA, and Jimmy Carter's former National Security Advisor, Zbigniew Brzezinski, has admitted this himself. They created the Mujahideen in Afghanistan to attack the Russian-controlled, Soviet Union-controlled government in Kabul, to entice the Soviet Union to invade Afghanistan, to, in Brzezinski's words, give them their Vietnam. And it worked. The Soviet Union did invade. There was a war went on for about a decade. About 1 million Afghans died. And it was a mortal blow in the end to the Soviet Union as planned. But then the Mujahideen that were created by Brzezinski and following on from him and Carter into the Reagan Bush administration, became the Taliban and became what is termed Al-Qaeda. And Al-Qaeda means the base or the database. And as Robin Cook, the former British Foreign Secretary, said before he died very, very soon afterwards, he said in a newspaper article that Al-Qaeda was actually the creation of the CIA, and they were just names on a database, Al-Qaeda, that the CIA had of Mujahideen fighters. So that was Afghanistan. And I'll come back to the Mujahideen in a second and Al-Qaeda. And then they went on to Iraq, of course. And Iraq was the big lie of weapons of mass destruction that can hit British targets in 45 minutes and hit America and all that. Absolute lies. And what we're looking at is this technique that I've been talking about all these years, problem, reaction, solution, and in terms of Iraq, no problem, reaction, solution.
Yeah.
Create a problem or the perception of one, get the reaction, do something, or at least open people to the fact that something has to be done in response to the problem which you created, and then offer the solution to the problems that you created. So the no problem reaction solution of weapons of mass destruction was invading Iraq. And then the list continued. They went into Libya. The excuse for that was Gaddafi is killing his own people. But actually what is happening, was happening then, is that Western, United States, British, NATO forces had trained and armed and controlled the so-called rebels in Libya, which were full of people from the former Mujahideen and Al-Qaeda. And they started attacking Gaddafi government targets. And at that point, the politicians and the media were silent. Soon as Gaddafi started responding to these attacks, they couldn't find microphones quick enough. He's killing his own people. And so they then get a United Nations Security Council resolution, I think it was 1973, and then they basically ignore the limitations of that and start bombing Libya into the Stone Age. And of course now Libya is an absolute human catastrophe, with factions fighting factions and factions within factions fighting factions within factions. They've had to send ships in to evacuate people. Libyans are leaving the country as refugees to get away from it. And so that was Libya. And then they started to move the rebels from Libya, same people, only now with Gaddafi's weapons, which they now controlled, and they moved them into Syria, because the next on the list was Assad. They wanted Assad, and they thought Assad would fall as quick as Gaddafi. And it's really thrown a spanner in the works that hasn't happened. And so they've been arming and funding the so-called Free Syrian Army, which they call the moderates, when actually it is anything but moderate. And what has happened is the same force has gone through changes of name. So the Mujahideen became Al-Qaeda. Al-Qaeda became different names in Syria. It became the Free Syrian Army, and eventually it became ISIS, ISIL, the Islamic State. And so we have now quite clearly, I mean, the evidence is overwhelming that all these arms, which are now openly being supplied by the United States to the Free Syrian Army trying to remove Assad, are actually going through that to ISIS, ISIL, Islamic State, because they are in effect the same organization. And so the idea was to get rid of Assad quickly. It's not happened. So what they tried to do was push that on by playing another no problem reaction solution, another what they call a false flag, by unleashing chemical weapons in Syria and blaming Assad for doing it. People will remember that.
Yeah.
And of course, if you're Assad, you have to be completely insane, and he's not, to actually do that, knowing that you're giving the enemies you know want to remove you in NATO, Britain and America, you're giving them the very excuse to come in and blow you away. Therefore, it's the last thing you're going to do. And of course, it's come out that actually it was rebels that did that. Absolute classic manipulation of perception by creating a problem and then blaming someone else for it. But they tried to get it through that they could unleash air attacks upon and beyond that on Assad. They tried to get it through the British Parliament last year. I think it was about this time last year, and they lost. And that was a shock to everybody. And once that had happened, I mean, Obama didn't even bother going to Congress because he knew by that time he wasn't going to get it through. So now they've got a problem. They've got Assad. They need to remove him on their wish list, and it's slowing down their unfolding agenda by not doing so. So what do we do? So what has happened is this ISIS has been unleashed on Iraq, and they say, oh, it came out of nowhere. No, it didn't. It was unleashed at the time that it was decided to unleash it. And of course, by attacking in Iraq against the Iraqi army, as the Iraqi army was overrun by these so-called terrorists and rebels, who actually they were very highly trained. They then inherited from the Iraqi army this vast array of military equipment, often state-of-the-art, that was given to them by the Americans and left behind when the Americans apparently left, but of course they never have. And what's kind of, funny, though not ha-ha funny, is that these apparently, these rebels that just came from the people, even though they've inherited this state-of-the-art weaponry, etc., they kind of know how to use it.
Yeah, it's incredible,
I mean,
isn't it?
And so what they've done, because unleashing this ISIS was going to happen anyway. These are the nihilists that Albert Pike talked about in the 19th century that were going to be unleashed in this unfolding process of global takeover. But what they've done is also spun it so that the base, the headquarters of ISIS is in Syria. And so these videos of people being beheaded, which actually don't show that, and certainly on the first one, the apparent beheading of the journalist Foley, even mainstream people came out and said, we think this is a fake. This is after the alternative media have shown it was. And I'm not saying these people weren't killed and aren't killed. I'm saying the videos that were produced are what do they keep saying? Oh, these are real high quality videos. Yeah, I bet they bloody are. And what's been happening is that they have set out to horrify the public, so that and then saying that and these people are coming to our country and all this to break the resistance of the public to action in Syria. And so what has now happened is we've gone in a year, because of ISIS, this creation of the West, we've gone from, no, we're not supporting you going in and bombing in Syria, to a clear majority, if the polls are to be believed, of those that say, yeah, okay, we don't want you to, but we see why you need to. So what's happening now, we've reached the point where the Americans are bombing in Syria, which is, I mean, they've created something that they were denied a year ago. The British government has now persuaded the Parliament to support bombing in Iraq, but already the next stage is unfolding, where David Cameron, the British Prime Minister, is talking about, the need to go into Syria, and if things happen, he has the right to decide to do that without going back to Parliament. And you've got the American administration saying we can't sort ISIS out in Syria, their headquarters, unless we remove Assad. So you can see this unfolding lie, which is the bedfellow, the stablemate of problem, reaction, solution, which is what I call the totalitarian tiptoe, going towards your goal in little steps, and every step is presented as unconnected to all the other steps, when actually it's exactly what is happening. These are steps towards an end goal, and the target in the end is Iran, but they've got to go a little bit before they can get there.
A lot of us here are using either pig's blood or bacon grease on our bullets, packing it in the middle. Why? So that when you shoot a Muslim, they go straight to hell. That's what they believe in their religion.
Don't fuck with white people.
You see?
Yeah, I see it. What if there's a group of them? Then how would you do it?
The next step in jihad does not involve random sporadic attacks. They start killing people. They start slaughtering people wholesale. Do you really expect me to stand here and wait till we get to that point? I'm not going to wait till we get to that point. I'm going to start doing something about it now.
Heavy Irving police presence, including SWAT on standby, as members of the Bureau on American Islamic Relations, or BEAR, take what they call a stand outside the Islamic Center of Irving.
We're here protesting Syrian refugees coming to America, protesting the Islamization of America.
It's a boiling pot. The top is on this kettle really, really tight, and it is going to blow.
Oh, there he goes. So that's David, right?
David and his crew are preparing for what they call an Arab Rising, where they fear thousands of Muslims would take to the streets in Texas. He agreed to take me out to where they train.
A protest could very easily turn into a battle in like 1 second, and it'd be a street battle. So that's one thing we prep for. Now, if you get to the point where there's an Arab Spring, where there's a lot of radical Muslims here and they all decide to hit the streets at one time, then that's totally different than being at a protest. That's going to be more of a battlefield type situation. We had 2 ISIS terrorists come to Garland, Texas, where I grew up.
Do you know the radicals? I get the sense you do.
I know some of them.
Who?
Yeah, of course.
Then don't be afraid to tell me. Who are the radicals?
I've been telling people.
Who are the radicals?
Well, it depends on what level you're talking about.
Doesn't matter. Who are the radicals?
Let's see. Mohammed al-Abayri, he was a Homeland Security advisor. The radical people in Europe are the same radical Islamic people we have here. They're not just like a different breed. They are the same people. And if they're doing it over there, they're going to do it here too.
Fear and distrust of Muslims has long existed in the U.S., particularly since 9/11. Recent ISIS attacks in Europe have only escalated tensions. But lately, anti-Muslim rhetoric is being used as a tool of politics.
Donald J. Trump is calling for a total and complete shutdown of Muslims entering the United States until our country's representatives can figure out what the hell is going on.
We need to be directing our efforts at stopping that from happening, stopping isolated communities from festering jihadism.
So we better start getting tough, and we better start getting vigilant, and we better start using our heads, or we're not going to have a country, folks.
In the past year, hate groups in America have grown by 14%. Texas is home to more than any other state. Isolated attacks on Muslims have surged. Several months ago, a man came to this shop, yelling anti-Muslim slurs. A week later, he returned, pulled out his handgun, and opened fire. A bystander was killed. Brian, an employee, was shot in the back during the encounter.
I heard the bullets hitting the rims and like the, you know, and then between the cars, I was just like, wow, because it was shot after shot after shot after shot. And once I felt that first bullet, after every bullet I heard after that, I felt it like if it was hitting me.
That's the dent, one of the bullets that hit.
Yeah.
Okay. And where was he shooting from?
From over there.
So he shot from over there and it hit here.
Yeah. Because he was shooting all across, all across there.
How many rounds did he shoot?
I'm not sure. It was a whole clip though. It was quite a bit. I'm not sure. I don't remember.
So he was just going nonstop.
Yeah, he let go till it ran out of bullets. Yeah.
Omar, the shop owner, ran out with his gun and fired back.
I finished all the bullets at him.
How many?
13 bullets. Yeah,
did he get hit?
Huh? Oh yeah, he did.
Omar says he must be armed and vigilant. He believes attacks on Muslims will only get worse.
I always keep my gun with me, you know. It's normal to me. I don't care. If I don't have a gun with me, it bothers me. Mr. Donald Trump, Mr. Obama, I don't care. This is gonna be like this forever till the war ends. And it's life. You like it or not.
So this is the Richardson Mosque. It's a place where David Wright and his crew have been protesting. I'm going to go and talk to the Imam and see what he has to say.
Imam Spendam Nakaju fears for the safety of his community. Bear showed up to his mosque with guns.
I think that it's almost as though they're kind of like waiting for this opportunity to think we're going to take America back, and we're going to do so by purging these minorities. That's the feeling I get, to be quite frank. I mean, I know still America is the land of, laws, and there's constitution and enforcement and so on and so forth. But
something's been brewing.
It's brewing, and the concern is that if there's really that many of folk who are supportive of a public display of xenophobia towards Muslims, towards Hispanics, towards, minorities in that sense, who knows? It's a ticking time bomb. It's scary.
As Bear prepared for another protest, a battle erupted on social media, this time between the members of Bear and the Black Panthers.
The Dallas police asked us to postpone it and have a meeting with them and the Nation of Islam and see if we can come to a diplomatic solution before protesting, because they were afraid that it was going to start a race riot. And our protest was not about race. It was about radical Islam being a problem in America. But the people in South Dallas from the Black Panthers and some other groups in that area decided to make it about color, black and white, and it was never about black and white.
So I'm over here looking at David's Facebook page, and it's just a few days before the protest, and I'm seeing lots of pushback from the Nation of Islam and the Black Panthers. I'm noticing comments like Black Power, death to crackers. It seems like things are getting very intense.
We're not going to take these threats and these actions by domestic terrorists, the Nation of Islam, and their militant wings like the Black Panthers and the Fruits of Islam, who threaten to kill white people, white babies, and cops.
You can't come into South Dallas and think you're going to intimidate us with weapons. This was a people's victory against Barrett. This was a people's victory from right-wing thinkers like Donald Trump and other folks like that. That you're not going to come down here to South Dallas, Martin Luther King, Malcolm X, Dixon Circle, Pleasant Grove, West Dallas, East Dallas, where you think you're going to come from?
In the wake of this conflict, the Muslim community often finds itself paralyzed, if not with fear, then indecision about what to do. I met with students at University of Texas in Dallas.
It's the followers of Trump that scare me the most, besides what he's saying of banning Muslims and stuff. It's people that are going to follow him.
I think that in order for Trump to have actually been empowered or came to where he is now, obviously there had to have been followers or people that agree with his rhetoric from beforehand.
After the Paris attacks, I was at a parking lot. I was coming out of the grocery store, so I got in my car. This guy approaches me. He's a big white dude. He's like, "Are you Muslim?" And I was like, "Yes, I'm Muslim. Do you have any problem or question?" Then he's like, no, you know what? If I could, I'll kill you here right now. And then he takes his jacket and shows me his gun.
What do you guys represent in all of this? Because look, it's true. There are honor killings happening. There are suicide bombs happening. It's happening. It's for real. So like, what do you have to say about all that? Where do you position yourself in all of this?
The reason why this, Islamophobia is so prevalent is because we as a Muslim community, we're not going out and doing our job. We're not going out and informing the masses that we're good people.
And we need to make big deals about this, whether it's money involved or not, lawsuits, but these kind of acts, we need to make a big deal out of it.
You're not wrong for being Muslim. There's nothing wrong with you being Muslim. We are way too scared to be Muslim.
With so many variables, it's hard to predict where things will go. A Trump presidency may embolden anti-Muslim sentiment. Another terrorist attack could lead to more backlash. David Wright and his followers insist they never instigate violence, only defend against it. But in a country infamous for gun-related deaths, it's not hard to imagine these armed protests quickly escalating into a shootout. The irony is that for both groups like Bear and the vast majority of Muslims across the US, the goal is the same: preventing terrorist attacks in the name of Islam.
Now, as promised, after these 4 videos, we have a little bit of talk about Nibiru, and I said I'd talk a bit more about that. Now, I'm of the opinion that since around 2003, a small dark red dwarf star, possibly the Sun's binary partner from ancient times, has been inbound from the distance of perhaps Jupiter, and may well have passed above the Earth in around 2013 on a tilted orbit that is taking it back past the Earth in 2017 or 2018. Now, one of its planets is the legendary Nibiru then, and Nibiru is seen as a winged disk in long-distance space photos, and it pumps out more and more dust and volcanic debris as it gets closer to the Sun. The object was clearly visible on Google Sky photographs, so for the past dozen or so years, that area on the maps was blacked out to the public. It has recently been uncovered and the object is seen. The dwarf star came in on its orbit. We haven't seen the dwarf star, but we've seen what seems to be moving with it. The dwarf star will have come in on its orbit on a more or less straight line from right ascension 5 hours, 53 minutes and 27 seconds, and declination -6 degrees, 10 minutes and 5.8 seconds. Until it began showing those gyrations that are associated with a nearby object being watched from Earth as the Earth orbits around the Sun. It's the Earth's orbit that makes the object coming in straight look like it's gyrating, moving left and right in our field of view. Now, while Nibiru encircling the star is potentially dangerous to the Earth, it also has moons orbiting around it, and these pose a threat as well. The red sun's arc around the Sun is a process of maybe a dozen years or so, and in that time Nibiru continues to revolve around it, perhaps once every couple of years, and the moons continue to revolve around Nibiru, perhaps on a time scale of only weeks or months. So all of these complicated motions no doubt present some concern to military astronomers. And I would say that it's probably true that a number of satellites are keeping check on this all the time. But to let people know that these things are happening, of course, would create widespread panic, so it's generally covered up. The various sightings of comets, space junk falling down, etc. over the last few years have, by and large, all been related to Nibiru, as it revolves around its almost invisible dull red dwarf star, visible only in telescopes that see in the infrared or far infrared even. Certainly not in visible telescopes. And Nibiru's orbit has crossed the Earth's orbit probably several times since 2011, although at an angle that is more than 60 degrees to the plane of the Earth's own orbit. And not necessarily as the Earth is passing by, but it does pass through the plane of the Earth's orbit. So there's a video we can watch of what this object looks like. It's been captured from the International Space Station, the ISS, on the 21st of November 2016 at 5 p.m.
Apparently, the highly debated planet Nibiru, commonly referred to as Planet X, has been confirmed using Google Sky. According to the website intellihub.com, back in 2014, a winged disc can be found on the Google Sky website after a blacked out section was finally removed. Let's see if it's true. Well, take a look at this. Conspiracy theorists have speculated about the planet's existence for decades, if not centuries. Could this finally be the proof they've all been waiting for?
Although the orbital parameters have not been released, it looks from the pattern of observations so far like it will be very visible again from May to October 2018, but it might also be visible on some occasions before then. One such occasion could be the date 7th of August 2017. It might possibly eclipse the Sun around the 2nd of January 2018. A large earthquake could also result somewhere within a few days around 4th of December 2017. And this was certainly a date of huge expectation for those who were watching this object over several years leading up to 2017. There was a pattern seen in earlier earthquakes from 2003 onwards. It seems that the Sun's faint red dwarf partner crossed above the Earth's orbit back in 2013 and is now passing below it on the way out. It will pass the orbital distance of Jupiter somewhere at around 2024, perhaps slowing down a little as it leaves. It will move fastest as it goes around the Sun at perihelion. Now, I fear that the military may have taken to the planet actually and fired a good number of powerful weapons at it, causing it to suffer some fracturing. And in the following video clip, a woman gets a clear image of the complex, and it does look indeed like it could have been broken into many large pieces over the years leading up to 2017. But anyway, that's just conjecture, and you can have a look at the video for yourself. It's entitled Nibiru's 13th and Final Flyby Approaches. And I should say at the outset that the various sightings that were seen before made a strong prediction that a new sighting would be on the 4th of December 2017, and many thought it would be a very dangerous and perhaps even fatal passing, whereas what really happened on the 4th of December is nothing. It was a great surprise that, in fact, for the first time, nothing did actually happen. But let's look at the pattern that was there before that in this video. So let's have a look at it now.
What in the heck, friends? Oh my freaking gosh, look at that thing. It's like a Christmas tree in the sky. Friends, I am just going to let that record for a minute. I have got to try again to go wake Paula up. This is just too unbelievable. That is not behind anything. There is not a cloud in the sky. It is what it is. I can't help whatever it is that I filmed, friends. I just can't help whatever this is.
So hi there, Dave Dobbs here. It's the 29th of June 2017 and I'm on the Glastonbury Festival site, and it's after the festival, and I just thought this was such a fitting place to start this video, because I'm going to give you the dates that you're looking for. I want to do that now, and I don't know what's going to happen exactly at those dates. I can just tell you more or less what's going on, you know, with the whole kind of Nemesis system, Nibiru, and the specific dates I think are going to be most important. And as you know, I've been giving you the information so you can calculate those dates, but you've also got to remember that we've come through. What have I got down here? I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12. We've had at least 12 flybys. 5 of which I've predicted now. The last 5 which I've predicted exactly when. Maybe I've been 4 days out at the most. But we've got past all of those flybys so far pretty much unscathed. I know that, you know, when we went over the earthquake on the 22nd of November last year, 2016, that was right where we were expecting Nemesis to be. We knew we were going to have a massive bump. Just like the massive bump when the system first came in. Do you remember the big earthquake I think it was on the 27th of February 2010? It was listed as an 8.8, one of the largest earthquakes ever recorded that didn't occur with a volcano, you know, but it was basically the largest single earthquake ever recorded. Until obviously that was in Chile in like I say 2010, February the 27th, and then we come 1 year and 12 days later, and we have Fukushima on the 11th of March 2011, which was originally listed as a 9.6, but then it seemed to be downgraded as a 9. I remember Nexus Magazine listed it as, I'm sure Nexus Magazine with their big conspiracy stories, you know, the magazine that's banned in America, I think they listed it as originally as a 9.6 with no pre-tremor. So there was no feasible way to understand how the largest earthquake occurred without any pre-tremor. That was what was so unusual, and that's why a lot of people think it was a conspiracy theory. And I personally think it was a bit of a conspiracy theory, that they knew it was going to happen, but they didn't warn Japan. And this is why I put this message out, because you had that first bump point on the exit point on the 22nd of November 2016, last year. You know it, you had it, we experienced it. And so we know 1 year and around about 12 days later, which I suppose will be Monday the 4th of December 2017. So around about that time we can expect a big bump point, a big earthquake point, a very big earthquake point. But we have to remember that even though, you know, New Zealand was massively affected on the 22nd of November 2016, we also have to remember that a big line of that coastline literally rose up about 2 meters. And so when we consider that, and that's why I've got the Mendits behind me really in this shot really, because we can see in the last time we had big geological changes, the land that rose and the land that fell down, the land that is buoyant on magma, basaltic magma. And granite floats on that, and there we saw New Zealand demonstrating its ability to float on that magma. It rose 2 meters. If the ocean floor had collapsed 2 meters, there would have been a massive tsunami, but actually it rose. And that's significant. That's really, really significant, because that offers New Zealand an enormous amount of information about understanding what's going to be, where it's going to be safe, because it's going to be very short, it's going to be very quick, it's going to be a blip, and then we're going to be past it. And I discovered these dates mathematically by working out the patterns, and then I started researching and finding the specific dates. And the first one I found, 5th of August 2011, which is this shot.
What's the day's date? 5th of August. Same thing, 2 tails.
And then it was the 2nd of February 2012, which was this shot. Then it was the 28th of February 2013, which was this shot. And then of course it was the 14th of October 2013, which was the most amazing shot, where it appeared like it appeared on the 21st of January 2017. Now that 14th of October 2013 shot, this incredible shot, it was one day out of the exact prediction that was on the time chart. When I discovered it, I couldn't believe it. You see the original footage, it's barely got any views.
It's silent, fairly bright. At first I thought it was the moon. Size-wise, maybe the size of maybe quarter moon. The amazing thing is the mist is just moves with it the whole way. The ocean below, still moving, constant speed. It was the most incredible shot of Nibiru ever shot up until the Matt Rogers shot on the 15th of August 2016 last year. And what was the other incredible one? Well, the 21st of January 2017. And now, of course, I'd predicted that massive one. But let's keep going. So, 14th of October 2013. Then we had the 23rd of November 2014, and that was quite an amazing shot. Then we had the 8th of June 2015. Then I predicted, because of all of those, and I'd found those dates, and I'd started working out there was a kind of 198-day, 200-day cycle. I started piecing together, I started piecing together in various animation packages just to try and work out the maths of this cycle and how it all fitted together and find a way to fit it all together. Of course, we just didn't know. We would know this roughly by the size of it on... you remember I predicted on the 22nd of December 2015 that it would fly by and it would be big, there'd be floods, there'd be all sorts of things going with it. And of course it really did flood in England. We had sinkholes open up, we had the most incredible storms we'd ever seen, some of the biggest storms we'd ever seen. It was beginning to reach the crescendo, and of course it's all starting now, as you can imagine. We're going to get to that. So I said on the 22nd, and then we had on the 20th of December 2015. And on the 24th of December 2015.
What the hell is that? Oh my freaking gosh, I gotta get out here. What is that? Holy moly. Holy moly. That's no freaking airplane. December 24th, 2015. Central Indiana. This is Becky Lewis. Oh my freaking God. Are you kidding me? Sally, bar the doors. That is no freaking airplane, friends. Let me tell you, that is no freaking airplane. That's in the southeast, where I always get the red glow. Holy God. Shit, I can't even hold it still. Please, excuse my language. Oh my gosh. I am just tripping out. What the frick? Oh my freaking gosh. Friends, it is going to go behind that stuff and I won't be able to see it anymore. Oh my gosh.
And then, of course, I've made a video saying, okay, if this thing is really exiting the sun as I'm predicting it is, at some point or other, we're going to see a 100-day point. Because the point that is being closest to the sun, as this thing is going over the top of the sun, the point of the Nibiru cycle that has been closest to the sun, as the Nemesis system has been going over the sun. The point that was closest to the sun, if it was truly on an exit trajectory, that point would cease to be closest to the sun because it would also be moving away from the sun with the whole system. So I put this out, and do you remember Becky Lewis posted, I believe, on the 29th of March 2016 that we would see it, it would pop into view, and sure enough it popped into view. That's when I was really beginning to triangulate the position of Nemesis itself, the dwarf planet. We'd have a big sighting on the 23rd then of June 2016, which of course showed up very tiny. We were on the far side of the solar system to it, but nonetheless it was still going to poke up because that's the characteristic and the way it works. Because when the Nibiru system, when the Nibiru comes into view, it is the furthest point away from the sun in the whole system. It's the only part of the whole system you can really see apart from special shots at specific times in the cycle. So then we come to my next big prediction. I said, well, when we pass on my timeline that of literally counting the days, the next big timeline was obviously the 25th of January 2017, and so obviously it flew by on the 21st, the day after the inauguration of Trump, and we saw, the Mexicans saw it as the fist of God. They didn't see it as Nibiru, but nonetheless it was exactly as we saw it coming in on the 14th of October 2013. Same form, came in exactly in, and then it flew by. And of course we were right next to it then. But well, I did make one last prediction recently, and that was obviously the 29th of April 2017. That was the last one I made. So that's 5 flybys that I've predicted. So if we take the 21st of the 1st, because I want to try and give you the most accurate understanding of when we're most likely to get the effects of this. So if we take the 21st of the 21st of January 2017, and we add 198 days, we come to the 7th of August 2017. But that's the point. We're going to be able to see it at points before that, But it's going to be, as I'm understanding, it's going to be very visible, and obviously they're going to chemtrail it away. But in non-NATO countries, you're going to be able to see that really quite clearly. It's going to be a staggering sight around that.
That is not behind anything. There is not a cloud in the sky. Not a cloud in the sky. I hope it doesn't go out of view before I get back, but I just have to let that record. I got to try and wake Paula up again. I don't know what to say about it. I really don't. I mean, it is what it is. I can't help whatever it is that I filmed, friends.
And then it's in our night sky at that point, but it's illuminated, and it's going to start heading in towards Earth. But as I'm seeing it, I think we're going to be quite far away from the planet Nibiru itself. I think it's going to be far below us, quite considerably below us, because that lower aspect. But nonetheless, there is a considerable chance that if we go 7th of August, let's do this in a different way. So we take the 21st to the 1st, 2017. We add 198 days. We have the 7th of August. That's when we know this thing is going to come into. That's when it's most likely going to come into view next. When we're going to start seeing things. But if we add another 198 days to that, we get to the 21st of the 2nd, 2018. And that's when it's going to be in view in the same sort of fashion, but much bigger, when it's past us. So if we go from the 21st of the 2nd, 2018, and we minus 50 days, that's going to equivalent to a quarter cycle of the Nibiru orbit around Nemesis. A quarter cycle. And we see it right when it's furthest away from our perspective to the sun in its cycle around Nemesis. And I know that's a bit awkward to understand, but that's where we see it. But where we see it doesn't mean it's where it most affects us. Where it's most likely to affect us is if we have to then take 50 days from the 21st of the 2nd, 2018, which brings us to the 2nd of January 2018. If we're going to get an eclipse from this, and a really close flyby that could geologically affect this Earth, then that date is around about the 2nd of January.
Now, this would be good and bad. It means Nibiru would not trouble us again for some several thousand years until it next enters the solar system, but it also means that a lot of debris must be in space in or near the Earth's orbit, as well as a couple of the moons that must be going around the shattered planet in wild orbits. These could end up going anywhere. It may be joining too many dots, but the warnings since 2016 that the Earth is going into an area of space that could see over 400 asteroids fall to Earth over the next century or so may be connected to this. Or, of course, that could be NASA disinformation also, if you remember the warnings of Werner von Braun, who mentioned among the Cold War, the terrorist threat, the asteroid threat, and then the fake alien threat, fake alien invasion threat. They were his 4 great warnings. All of them, in a way, were manufactured and to that degree fake threats. However, it's quite true that we are in a quite magnetic region of space. The global warming going on all the planets is due to magnetism, and of course magnetism does have an effect on iron-rich rocks in space in terms of organizing them into fields of asteroids, and so that threat may, in some way, the asteroid threat at least may in some way be founded in a factual basis. But anyway, money is being diverted from NASA lately to private space adventure companies, with those companies being asked to equip their manned and unmanned craft with weapons capable of shooting down space rocks when they see them. Worst of all, a field of falling space rocks from Nibiru's destruction could also be explained convincingly, perhaps as the space cannons of alien invaders. So as far as that goes, the threat of Nibiru may be with us in one form or another for some time to come. Well, thanks for listening tonight, everyone, and I hope that little bit about Nibiru was helpful to some as well. I'm probably leaning at this stage to the belief that it is sort of out there in one way or another, because I know that Jesus mentioned there's signs in the heavens that would come, and I think his coming is quite close. So whatever it is in the heavens that's going to cause the trouble, it's probably out there already. Hopefully I haven't sent you away to have nightmares tonight, and I'll see you all again safely, I trust, next week as we get stuck into our second study on the New World Order and go in the direction of determining how the two beasts in Revelation 13 fit in with Pike's vision, and how this also meshes with a push for extreme global socialism through Agenda 21, where global laws will push aside all local laws for the sake of achieving the great Luciferian goal. We'll also touch on the issue of pedigree within Satanism, where, just like the Messiah in Israel, and because it's a substitute and a counterfeit, the occultist Antichrist will also need to show a bloodline that makes him worthy to play his role as the true seed of Lucifer in the world, and therefore as one who is worthy to lead the world into their Luciferian future. So we'll see you then, and I wish you all the best. Bye-bye.